Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Hi, this is Dan Gilmore from Softeon. I'm our Chief Marketing Officer. We're a supply chain software company. And so my tip for the new warehouse in terms of warehouse safety is going to follow along with that with just some thoughts on what might be done with software. Certainly people have looked at things like IoT type devices that just sort of monitor when people are too close together. We developed an app that is part of our warehouse management system, but takes it even further. So with people wearing beacons, basically a form of IoT, the software actually keeps track of where they are in terms of equipment or walking the aisle. And it's smart enough to know, for example, that if I want to maintain 6 feet of distance, that I'm not going to send somebody down an aisle unless it's a very wide aisle that's going to require for somebody to pass a worker that's already there picking some products. Far up in the aisle, we won't even give the task to the worker to go down that aisle until there's enough social distancing. So just be aware that there are some smarts coming out in terms of task management that in the warehouse, but usually part of a WMS, that can be used to enforce social distancing to keep people safe from infection.
Fulfillment demand continues to skyrocket and outpace available labor. To keep up, warehouse operators are turning to flexible fulfillment solutions like 6 River Systems. Utilizing 6 River Systems' award-winning combination of collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, and operational expertise will make your associates and wall-to-wall fulfillment workflow more efficient. No new infrastructure, no change to warehouse layout, easy to deploy and scale, easy to train and retain associates, all at half the cost of traditional automation. Want to take your fulfillment operation to the next level? Go to www.6river.com to learn more. That's www.6river.com to learn more.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I am going to be joined by Dan Gilmore. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at Softeon, and he's going to talk to us about WES, which is a warehouse execution system. We're going to talk about what exactly is that, and what's the difference between a WES and a WMS. We're going to look at a couple different use cases, and we're going to talk about differentiators that Softeon offers in the market. So I'm going to welcome Dan to the show. Dan, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Kevin, I am great. I appreciate you having me today.
Definitely happy to have you on. I know that we've been trying to do this for quite some time, actually. We've had conflicts on both ends. So it's good to finally connect and get this conversation underway. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Softeon and what it is you guys do?
Sure. We are a supply chain software company with a pretty broad portfolio of solutions, but that includes 3 main kind of hubs, if you will. First is warehouse management. That's what started the company in 1999, and have all the kind of ancillary things that go around that, things like labor management and yard management and slotting optimization and assembly and kitting, those kind of ancillary modules. Mm-hmm. Then newer is our warehouse execution system. That's the subject, obviously, of today's conversation. Right. It kind of adds a new level of capabilities to WMS. We'll discuss that in more detail today. And then what's called distributed order management, which is a class of software that's very popular in e-commerce, but much beyond that as well, that identifies the best sourcing point for a given order to be fulfilled from that meets customer demands or any other kind of service level commitments while considering network capacities and constraints, but doing so then at the least possible cost. It has broad application in many B2B and B2C scenarios, but it really has become essential for multi-channel commerce to do things like buy online, pick up in store, store fulfillment, those kind of scenarios there. So we got great customers, everybody from UPS Supply Chain Solutions and Do It Best hardware and Sony and Duluth Trading Company and a number of others. And that's really our story. Like I say, been around for 22 years now.
All right. It sounds like you guys have definitely evolved with the times and created more robust systems to be able to handle the changes in distribution and things of the nature over the last 22 years. So one of those things is this warehouse execution system, which is kind of like a newer kind of system to the block, right? I mean, not totally brand new, but something that necessarily hasn't been around, I guess, as long as a WMS. So tell us, what is a warehouse execution system? What is that?
Yeah, it's a big topic, and it has been around actually for some period of time, more than a decade, but it's really just in the last few years that it's really started to gain some prominence and kind of emerging as its own space.
Right.
So I think that's what's changing, and that's what's made this so timely. We do a lot of work with Gartner, the analysts, and they said, even 6 months, a year ago, they weren't getting kind of, standalone warehouse execution system calls. Now they're coming in fairly regularly. So there's obviously something going on here.
Right.
So, warehouse execution system, it is this, kind of newer class of software, I guess I'd just say that, and I'm going to explain some of this as we go along, but it just provides another layer of what's called orchestration, the flow of how work is released to the floor and executed, and all kinds of new optimization as well to both picking and fulfillment processes. That said, there's a lot of companies out there, if you put it, claiming they have warehouse execution systems, if you put in WES or warehouse execution and search, the things come back, and I know full well that there's big differences between those solutions. So it's still kind of early in the game here. The space hasn't really, congealed in a way that it's well understood like warehouse management. Oh, even warehouse management, right? You have very large, sophisticated applications. You have mid-sized ones, you have smaller ones, et cetera. So there's always going to be those differences, but. It's kind of interesting how WES came about. It really happened, like I say, more than a decade ago, when a couple of materials handling related kind of vendors decided that WMS was not really doing the proper job in terms of considering materials handling equipment utilization as they released work. It was sort of oblivious to what's going on, say, on the sortation system. And if you've ever been in a warehouse, I'm sure most of your audience has seen this, where as waves are created and released, you get these big peaks and valleys in volumes. And so you see all this work going on and all kinds of boxes shooting down the divert lanes on the sortation system. And then you go through these periods where almost nothing is coming through. Even though there's 30,000 cards that need to get out today, you have 20, 30 minutes or whatever where the volumes are very low. And so somebody decided that there was a way that could be, maybe better addressed. And the reality of it is, I think they were largely right. There were some vendors, Softeon being among them, that took into that feedback from materials handling systems and released work accordingly. But many did not, and were really kind of only focused on optimizing their own, what they thought was their own, domain, if you will. And so I think, there was a lot of merit in that criticism. And, long story short, that's really how the warehouse execution system, sector was created, and has now blossomed with the great interest in automation, although WS is not only for automation. I'll make sure we cover that point today, but it really is now starting to take off as a something that kind of sits between the warehouse control system, which is the lower level controls, PLC coding, all that stuff that turns the rollers and flips the diverts and manages the merges and all the things that the WCS does. The WMS and what we've known for obviously 45 years or so now in terms of the functionality there, and provides this new set of capabilities that we just didn't have in WMS before.
Interesting. So it's been around for a decade, and I guess in my thinking, I kind of want to echo what you're saying, is that it's really kind of become more like buzzy, I guess, in the industry in the last couple of years. So, it sounds like Softeon was pretty early on in the WES space. So, how did you guys kind of recognize that there was that pivot, and you did need to create a system like this?
Yeah, well, that's kind of an interesting story, actually. I mean, as I said, we had WES capabilities embedded in the WMS for many years. So one of our customers, Sony DADC, that's a distributor of DVDs, games, and other kind of physical electronic media. Okay. And they've got, I forget what the number is now, but I want to say eight very high-speed unit sorters. It's hellacious volumes that they're shipping out the door. And so we had to be aware early on what was happening on those unit sorters, and feeding work in so that there was the least, amount of dead time, if you will, as you inducted additional waves or sortation waves into that equipment. So we've been doing that for a long time. And then as this market started to emerge kind of outside of Softeon and talking about this new space called WES, we said, well, wait a minute, we're kind of already doing that. Maybe we should pull it out. So we pulled it out. It's an extension of the WMS. We worked with several of our key customers to design it and learned some very interesting lessons there, which I'll come back to in a second. But it really helped us build it out into a standalone product so it can work, with the Softeon WMS, but it also can work without the Softeon WMS as a standalone solution on top of any WMS. That has some real advantages. I want to cover that later today, but that's kind of how we got into it, and we've really put a lot of effort into that in terms of development and research in terms of what's really going to drive value, and we've done a pretty good job of packaging something up.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, definitely. Yeah, it's an interesting story, and I think it's interesting how it's developed over time as well. And as I mentioned earlier, it sounds like you guys have really kind of been able to adapt to the changing atmosphere and climate of distribution. It's become such a high-paced thing, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of automation being introduced now and implemented more often to keep up with the higher demand, especially as consumer behavior has changed, and even how dramatically it's changed with the pandemic as well. So we're talking about a warehouse execution system, but we're mentioning WMS in there a lot as well, and there's so many different systems out there. You even mentioned WCS as well. So, but let's look at the main differences here. What's the difference between a OS and a WMS?
Yeah, I could go at that from a couple of different angles, Kevin. Okay. So I guess I'll just start, what does a WES do? Let's start with that, right? And there is going to be some overlap with WMS. There's no question those lines are blurring to an extent. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But, there's 5 or 6 things that I always say a WES does. First time, it just provides very granular, real-time visibility to what's happening in a distribution center at every processing area there is, right? So it's real-time information that's used not only by managers and supervisors to say, oh, geez, look what's happening in case pick, or look what's happening in this module of a case pick area or piece pick area. Okay, that we're expecting 300 cases an hour and we're only getting 240. What's the matter? Something needs to be addressed. Right. But the interesting thing that visibility that you give, the tools you give to managers to make smarter decisions, the WES is using that exact same information in a digital form to make decisions about what work should be released and how it should flow optimally to the floor. So it's one set of information, some being displayed as dashboards and decision support tools to managers and supervisors, but the WES leveraging that same data. So that's very, very important. For all the optimization or all the picking, improvements we've done with WMS order batching, how do I create and release to the floor the optimal set of work at any given point in time, given my customer commitments, given my volumes, giving my resources? And this is really, Kevin, where I think it's a step change kind of cycle from the last 20 years in WMSs. We had improvement, but they were kind of incremental improvements. Whereas this is now becoming more of a step change operation, which is the automated release of work to the floor without the need for wave managers, without the need for supervisors, just based on the priority of that order, the order type and channel it's serving, what human and equipment resources are available, what the priority is, what the carrier cutoff times are. And this is what Gartner calls the autonomous WMS. And there's no question this is where this is headed. We're doing it today. It's live. This isn't a theory. This is really happening. Our early customers had looked at what we were going to implement, and they said, we're just not quite ready for the full autonomous release of that work. We think we just want you to make recommendations, and then based on those recommendations, we'll say yay or nay and let the work go. Well, there was somebody got sick, somebody's wife got in a car accident. I don't know. There was like this, unfortunate series of events And we're really, when we went live, they had no choice but to let the system do it. They didn't have the manpower to do it. And the system worked just absolutely flawlessly. So you think about the amount of, and this is really where the key difference is, the amount of human decision-making, even that is necessary, even in very advanced Tier 1 WMSs like one Softeon provides or others provide as well.
Yeah.
The system, the people, it's still heavily reliant on people. With WES, the system is going to take care of a lot more of that decision making in an automated fashion, because it can just process all that data so much better than a person can do. And this is, of course, now where you start to get into things like AI and machine learning, but it's not dependent on those two things. They're just nice, adds to it. But you think about a WMS that just runs itself. This is really the promise of WMS plus WES together.
Interesting. It sounds like the WES itself is kind of like that orchestration of what's happening, and I love the fact that you mentioned that it's making more decisions for you, because as you mentioned, and I can attest to through the WMS, there are still a lot of human decisions that need to be made to get things where they need to be. And allocate resources. I think that kind of calls back to what you mentioned earlier in our discussion as well, where you're talking about, WMS doesn't really take into account, where are your forklifts or machines allocated to those resources and those types of things as well. So it can really help you be more efficient in that aspect. So I'm curious, talk to us a little bit about, I guess, maybe to give some better perspective to the listener on what exactly a WES is. What are some examples of where WES would come into play and potentially make something a little more efficient, or make it flow a little better, and where WMS might fall short?
Yeah, Kevin, and I don't know if it's so much a matter of a WMS falling short as much as I just say there's just such new opportunities now with what you can do with WES. And I think one of the real insights that we had is that WES can derive significant benefits, not only in automated warehouses where it started, and it was really coming out of interest in selling more equipment, frankly, but also has great applicability for manual facilities or kind of hybrid facilities or medium levels of automation. Okay. And you think about it, like when you're managing resources in a distribution center, let's say you have an auto store, whatever, it can do, 1,000 orders an hour, whatever that happens to be. There's inputs, there's outputs, and then there's some kind of, constraints relative to that. Well, it's no different than manual case pickers in a pick module, right? Mm-hmm. There again, you have inputs and you have outputs. The big difference is with the case pickers is that it's more flexible because you can add and take away resources, right, and affect that output, whereas the auto store or any other piece of equipment, it's kind of like a fixed capacity. So one of the insights that we really had there is that the same thinking that drives the flow and orchestration of picks and orders across an automated system can be used in non-automated systems as well, as the manual parts of even automated systems that are feeding into that. So that was really one of the key insights. From just, your question about sort of like where's the opportunity, I think there's several things. And this is true for whether it's automated or non-automated. Again, as I said before, it's, how do I get the best decision? How do I meet customer demand for right here and now, and do so in a way that involves least possible operating costs? Now, that doesn't mean that I couldn't automate a process or I couldn't do something different later on, midterm or whatever, to reduce those costs. What it means is right now, how do I make the best decision for this order right now that's going to make it on the truck on time, but do so in least possible cost? That's part of what WES can do. The other thing it does is, especially in automated environments, is there's often, beyond often, usually a delta between the big throughput of these systems. Let's take a put wall system, for example. Mm-hmm. What is the put wall, what is the throughput of that put wall going to be, and what is actually being realized? The reality of it is often there's a significant gap, and WES can help companies reduce that gap rather substantially. And then, it gives you one place to really control the flow of all the processes that are happening in the distribution center, rather than having these different silos. If you had any kind of automation, it's kind of operating by itself. And we've actually talked to a number of customers recently, one who's got all kinds of automation. It's like a 2 million square foot warehouse in the apparel industry, automation all over the place. Yet they just can't get enough product out the door. And they keep trying to solve it by adding different wave types, thinking that's going to be the answer. And it's not turning out to be the answer. And the problem is there's not synchronization in the process. You're pulling the work through rather than pushing the work through, and you've got mismatches between, say, the capacity of the packing operation and the capacity of the picking operation. So let me give you one more just kind of easy example that your audience may relate to in terms of where WES can play a role. If you think about a put wall, and I'm going to make the assumption that your readers know or listeners know what a put wall system is, but basically something where you pick orders and then put them into little cubby holes based on what the order is, and then when an order is complete, on the backside a light goes on and you pack it out and ship it off to the customer. It's kind of an e-commerce kind of a thing. Right. Well, here's some problems you can run into. So, for example, let's say I have 3 line items on an order, an online order. And let's say 2 of them are coming from carton flow rack, piece picks, and I can pick those rather quickly, and they're relatively close by the put wall processing area. Okay, that's one thing. But let's say I got a 3rd line item that's on a mezzanine and static shelf. It's going to take quite a bit longer, maybe as much as 30-40% to pick and transport that order from the mezzanine to get to that put wall scenario, right? And so what's happening now is many companies don't have software that is capable of addressing that. So what does our WES do? It, in effect, will take a look at those 3 line items. It will say, don't release the first 2, release the one on the mezzanine 30 to 40% earlier. And so that after it is picked, now we send a signal to say, okay, now it's okay to release the 2 picks for the carton flow rack. And then all 3 of those line items are going to show up at the put wall in relatively the same amount of time. The whole key to a put wall is turning that as fast as you can, not 30, 40 minutes at a time, but 5, 10 minutes at a time, doing it very, very rapidly. So that's just another, handful of examples of where a WES can really come into play to drive efficiencies. And the one other point I just kind of make, getting back to this, what's different about a WMS, kind of in the example I just gave there with the put wall, the WES is always on. It's always listening and monitoring the environment. And I referenced that the data at the beginning of the dashboards, that the same data was supporting that kind of real-time decision-making. Think about it that way. The WS is sitting there listening, and it's watching for conditions to change and events to occur. Okay. And it's going to make proactive decisions about how the work flows and what work is released based on that information. Okay? So, just here's another example. I'm going to go back to a quasi-put wall example, but it can be anything. It can be a goods-to-person system. If I have a put wall, and I also have a path to pick an order from a traditional cart type pick. Right. The better way to pick that order more efficiently is to use the put wall. But a couple things. First off, the put wall may not have the capacity to process all the orders. Maybe the put wall can do 800 orders in a given period of time, but I have 1,200 orders coming in. So the first decision that has to be made is which of those 1,200 orders are the best 800 for the put wall in terms of efficiency. There's a lot of smarts that probably beyond today's show to go into all that, but there's a lot of smarts that goes into making that decisions. As a simple example, single line items, single ship orders are not good to go through the put wall because you're picking it twice. You're picking it once to put in the put wall, you're picking it again to put it into the packing. It'd be much better to do a batch pick and take all of those single line item over to the packing station directly. So that's the first thing that needs to be considered. The second thing is I may have, as I said, multiple paths to the customer. I may have the put wall capability that is more preferred because it's more efficient. May have the manual cart path as well. Well, the system, this is this always on notion. The system is going to be able to detect if I have congestion developing in the put wall area. And when there's congestion developing, and who knows what the cause of it is, any number of different factors can happen, then we don't want to put more orders through those for some period of time until that congestion can be relieved. So first off, we're going to be aware that congestion is happening from that real-time monitoring that I was talking about before. And second, once we perceive that congestion is happening, for some period of time, we're going to take some of those orders that would have gone through the put wall, we're going to automatically, without any human intervention, moving some of those orders over to that manual cart pick area, picking those in that area, bringing them to the packing station, and then once the bottleneck in the put wall area is relieved, now we're going to go back to the normal distribution of our orders are assigned to those 2 different areas. So those are just a couple of examples I hope that made some sense in terms of just the next generation of smarts that WS can really provide that just have not been available in traditional WMS.
Yeah, totally. I think that definitely makes it a lot clearer on how that works. And I love the example there of the put wall capacity, right, is 800 orders, but you got 1,200. And, determining which which orders are the right ones. So the fact that the WES could do that for you, as opposed to probably some type of manual sortation and analysis, is really a big improvement on the efficiency, I can imagine, and will help your throughput even more. So I'm really appreciative.
If I could go ahead and just add real quick, just one more further point on that, just to understand. So first off, it's like, okay, what are the best orders to go through the wall? The best 800 to go through the wall out of the 1200 for some block of time. But it gets even more optimized than that, right? Because I'm also going to be looking for the most efficient, once I have those 800 orders, what are the most efficient grouping or batching of those orders to drive the greatest efficiencies? So if, for example, I have 10 wall modules, just to make up a number there, and I have, let's just say, 12 SKUs that with just 12 different SKUs, I can complete 200 orders. Make up whatever number you want. Okay. So the other thing is, then how do I create a batch? Remember, I talked about optimizing of order batching. How do I create a batch that delivers the greatest efficiencies in terms of both picking and packing efficiencies simultaneously? This is just where the smarts are getting. We've had good smarts in WMS, but not great smarts in WMS. Right. And that's really what WS is doing with all that kind of real-time logic that I'm talking about in terms of meeting the demand, meeting the service at least possible operating cost.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that really explains it well, and kind of makes it very, very clear, kind of the differentiator there. So we're talking about differentiators, and obviously, as you mentioned in the beginning of the show, there's a couple different companies out there that have a WES, and you guys offer one in Softeon. So what's the differentiator for Softeon versus some of your, I guess, would be competitors?
Yeah. Well, thanks. Well, I appreciate the question and give us an opportunity to show our stuff a little bit here. So,
sure. Yeah.
First off, I just feel like, I don't have a great third-party source to validate this necessarily, but we just feel like we're way out in front of the curve here in terms of our traditional competitors and major WES providers. There's some nice solutions out there, but certainly in terms of other WMS companies specifically, we feel like we're, just have more capabilities, more functionality, more configurability, greater smarts than the rest of the market does. In terms of other WES players, and again, it's a mixed bag from some very good systems to ones that just kind of name WES, even though that doesn't really probably belong, as the moniker. But one of the real advantages we have a component-based architecture, services-based, component-based architecture. We've had that since the beginning of the company. Serves us very well to this day. So what that allows us to do is have what I call a shared component library. So you think about capabilities in WMS, you think about capabilities in WES. Again, for us, it's an extension of WMS, but it can be deployed separately. But let's take an easy example. Let's say it's a standalone WES implementation. We have one of these going on right now for a major e-fulfillment company.
Okay.
But they need some things that are traditionally part of WMS, like cartonization, advanced cartonization, or slotting optimization. Okay. So in our case, even though these are things that we've had in the WMS as either inherently or as add-on modules for many, many years, okay, we can just take those two components, cartonization and slotting optimization, and add them to the WES capability. So now you've got a very tailored solution that meets some additional needs but you can get it without any additional modifications, then they're available to you. Whereas somebody that's coming at WES from a non-WMS background is probably not going to have those kind of components that they can leverage. And it's the same, it goes the other way, the same thing too. We use our WES to do a very different kind of integration with many materials handling systems, whether that's technologies, whether that's a voice, we have our own voice solution, but things like smart carts, things like mobile robots, things like pick-to-light. We've talked about put walls.
Right.
Okay, we directly integrate with that equipment. We don't need any third-party software. This is different than we believe anybody else is doing. Gives you all kinds of operational advantages, eliminates silo to make decisions based on the full complement of WMS available information. But we can take some of those things. Let's say it's the put wall integration, or let's say it's mobile robot integration, or whatever it happens to be, and we can just take those components from WES and attach them to WMS. So the shared component library is really, a huge advantage for us, either coming at it from the WMS or the WES perspective. And then just one last thing, I guess I'd say, as I talked before again about we found a way to deliver value for, automated environments, but also manual and hybrid environments as well. This is something very different. Everyone else that is talking WES is talking almost exclusively for automated kind of environments. Last April, fortunate enough, UPS, one of our WES customers, issued a press release. UPS Supply Chain Solutions issued a press release talking about how they were building the new smart distribution center, smart warehouse of the future, on a backbone of Softeon, WMS, and WES. And they've implemented WES in a number of places, some automated, some less automated. They cited an example in that press release, which is readily available. Just search UPS and WES or UPS and Softeon or something, you'll find it. But they cited an example of a 50% productivity gain at one of their client customers. And that 50% productivity gain was not in an automated warehouse. It was using WES in a manual warehouse. That's the kind of impact this technology can have.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And especially the last tidbit that you threw out there, that it was a more manual warehouse than an automated warehouse. And the fact that you're getting that productivity improvement can show you really the benefit of having this warehouse execution system. So now I want to thank you, for coming on and explaining the warehouse execution system. It's very, very clear, and especially the examples that you give really show the benefits of it and all of that. So I had a question about Softeon as well. We're doing podcasts here, but I see that Softeon also has a podcast as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just something we call Logistics Insights. So we put it out every week or 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how fast we can crank them out. But meant to be just shorter kind of key points. So we only go maybe 3-4 minutes most of the time, and just pick one topic. We did one on put walls. We did one on distributed order management. We did one on what we call the new task interleaving, which is a whole another kind of concept. So just something we thought, short and sweet, and just help educate the marketplace in terms of opportunities and what technologies and how they can be addressed. So it's on all the major podcast channels, as I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah, definitely. And always good to have a fellow podcast company with a podcast on the show as well. So definitely good to connect with you and hear about Softeon and the warehouse execution explanation. Solid, really, really good job on that, and I really appreciate that. I learned more. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the new warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the new warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.